Hi, it's Alicia with Performentor, and we're having another Heuristic podcast. Today, we're with Matthew Schmidt. He is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the CEO of Peoplelogic. That's a people analytics tool for leaders who want to lead well. Matt, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Thanks for having me today, Alicia. We really appreciate it, and we're really looking forward to the chat.
Awesome. Well, today's heuristic that we're going to talk about is work hard to make hard things more simple, which is an iteration of a value that at a place where I used to work, which we called fight for simplicity. And it sounded so silly to me at first. I'm like, why would you do that? But over time, and as I become an entrepreneur myself, I realized how hard it is, first of all, and secondarily, how important it is to keep things as simple as possible without making them simplistic. So that's kind of where that came from for me. What was your first reaction to that heuristic?
You know, this has been a really interesting journey, as we were just talking about. The first one that we discussed, me talking about, was actually a different one, and then I saw this heuristic, and we have been on a journey at Peoplelogic here to make organizational health as simple as possible. And so for me, this one jumped out at me, and because our first iteration of things and our first iteration of the company has been anything but simple. And so being able to, find our way through to what is simple enough, but not too simple, is, always something that we strive for, and not something that I come by naturally.
Well, what your software does is anything but simple. And I probably barely understand it.
It's funny because just like when we first start writing and I first start to put words down, those words that come out are as I call them, quarter words and not nickel words. And that often needs to then be distilled down so that it's understandable. And very often not coherent. And software is much like that, and building companies is like that too.
Yeah. And busy businesses are so busy. So like this reminds me of another little saying that I have, is like, if I've got a little bit of time and energy from a CEO or founder or owner, I should probably not spend too much of that time giving them new terminology to learn. Of course, here I am guilty using the word heuristic, but
everybody, we are busy as leaders of organizations, and that's not ever something that slows down or stops until we eventually, hopefully have an eventual exit and get to decide what we're doing next. And so, it is, people remember things that are simple. They don't remember things that are complicated. And so it's very much like I learned as we're going through a fundraising process, that people similarly remember stories. They don't remember statistics. They don't remember complicated things, but they remember stories. And so distilling your pitch down into a story that can, people can relate to, that they can understand, that connects with them. It is about making it simple enough that it sticks in their brain, and that it's catchy, and that, much like these heuristics, it's got to be something that people can connect with, and that they feel are, simple enough to pass on, to share.
So how did you accomplish that? I mean, what are the steps that you took to, not saying your pitch is like at a point of perfection, I know it never is, but let's say it's better than it was before. Like, how did you get to where you are from where you were?
For me, it's been a process of iteration. And so that, at least in terms of the pitch at my own work. So that it's creating a starting place, and then being able to chop off words that don't add value. And the more I do that, and eventually I get it down to a place that makes sense, and then it's about practice and getting outside advice and insight from people who have done it before. And then sometimes there's those days where you get it to where you think you have it simple enough, and then you pitch it and it falls flat on its face, and then you have to go back and figure out where you took out too many words.
I was going to ask you that. Like how do you decide what words to take out, what to add back?
Unfortunately, I can't say that it's very scientific. It's very much a trial and error process, and saying it out loud and saying the words and practicing them on people, and until I find that it actually makes sense in the way that it's written. And then, as I said, it's about making, when I give it, do people understand? Do they nod? Does it resonate with them? And some of this is a lot harder over Zoom, because yes, you can see the nodding and some of the facial expressions, but it's all distilled down towards two-dimensional. There the blurs in the background, and as it gets translated from human interaction to ones and zeros, signal gets lost. And so sometimes you have to just keep trying and iterate and find your way into eventually something that resonates more than once or twice.
Yeah, I remember when I first stepped out of the job, right, and was trying to figure out how to talk about what exactly was going to do and how to talk about it. And I just remember I would have the conversations, like you said, you'd be just watching people. Do they look glassy-eyed and confused, or are they nodding along, right? Or are they nodding along politely? But
yes, the polite nod is always the tough one, particularly over Zoom. And so it's taken us a long time to understand, while the word simple is actually in our tagline of our upcoming website, how we've talked about what we do has been anything but simple. And part of that is because there hasn't been a category that really defines where we're headed. And so, we spend a lot of time trying to talk about it in the context of, well, we're like this and like this and like this, and continue to try to iterate into, what's simple while still being full of meaning and context for people to read and discuss.
Yeah, what category have you distilled it down to? I think I saw something like organizational health or something like that.
Yeah, and so I think lately people have been worried about what we call organizational health, and organizational health is a pretty old word, actually, going back nearly 40 years. But its definition of that hasn't really evolved very much. And for us, because of what we do and because of the systems we connect to and how we help people, we think about organizational health as this combination of people health and process health. And with that, organizational health becomes the word that people are like, oh yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand where my people are burning out, or where they're having bad interactions, or where their processes are inefficient, or where we've got this angry customer and maybe I'm not seeing it. And all these things that they're pulse surveys and other point in time and reactive measures are while they have served a purpose and are very useful, become not as useful for moving forward as they try to run faster, to grow more quickly, to be more effective, and to have a quantifiable measure that they can use to be able to talk about how their organization is doing.
And so I think sometimes those are lagging indicators. I think we've talked about that before, rather than something that's indicative of current and future success.
Exactly. By the time you get that pulse survey that's already got somebody at a 3, it's probably, there's a chance you could save it, but there's a lot that has to go into that, and that's already, the situation that created that is already taken place.
Yeah. So it seems to me, as I'm like listening and kind of connecting dots in my head as I hear you talk about this, it seems like the important part of simplicity is it meaningful and understandable to other human beings. Like if you just like you said, if you just shrink the number of words or the syllables of words, that doesn't necessarily get you the results that you want if it takes away the ability to communicate your intent. Is it?
Exactly. I think that's a great way to describe it. It has to be, everything that you say must still be filled with signal and intent. It has to be clear enough. And certainly I acknowledge that I am not the most clear spoken person at times, particularly when I get excited. And so, while humans tend to be meaning making machines, they still need that signal. They still need the intent of what you're saying, and they still need to have the baseline understanding of where you're coming from and what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And the simpler you can make it while still retaining all those things, the better off people will be in terms of how they understand what you're trying to say and their engagement with it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
to me, this was a very important heuristic in the sense that it is incredibly hard and time consuming to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler.
it is very hard. I was also thinking as you talk that, not only like talking to customers or prospective customers or investors, but also being able to communicate in a way that's the right level of, I don't know, fidelity or simplicity internally. So, that would be indicative of organizational health. I mean, because if people think they're communicating by saying words,
Yes.
but the message isn't getting across either because it's too long or complicated or just fuzzy. And then organizational performance suffers and people get frustrated.
Exactly. And I'm sure you see this a ton in the businesses that you help is, simple, clear communication filled with signal, and emotion, but not bias and, negative intention is so hard to instill in an organization but so important, right? Like you must, to be able to communicate in a way that's simple and still exciting also for the, as a leader, you spend a good portion of your time being the person trying to keep the rest of the team excited and drummed up and share your wins and those things. And so you need to be able to describe it simply and excitably in a way to keep people engaged. I think that there's a similar corollary that occurs in software development as well, and that my CTO is routinely, I won't say berating, but developers, as they do, berate the rest of us on the simplicity of the code. And very often the first cut of the code, while it may have seemed easier to do, is not the most readable, is not the most maintainable, is not the most clear, the simplest. And he is forever on a mission and to be able to drive us all towards simpler, clearer code that in the end, if we all would just listen, probably would result in everyone having an easier time and a more maintainable code base and a better product. But that's not the way that people tend to think. It's all about, how do I get this done now so that I can then move to the next thing? And very often that speed is the enemy of simplicity in that context.
Right. That's true. You need a little bit of slack to work that out. So I guess like the measure of simple code isn't just how many lines of code in order to do X, Y, Z. So how would you define that?
So, and for our CTO, he tends to find, is it readable? Is it going to be maintainable? Is it, those tend to be the driving qualities for him. Very often they are not necessarily shorter. But they very often are more advanced methodologies, but they in the end become simpler and more maintainable when we have to come back to them later and have we decide to leave the way we wrote it first, and that has the inevitable problems that we have to come back to 6 months later because there's a bug now. So that tends to be how he looks at simpler.
Gotcha. So there's a couple of things I'm hearing. So one is that the code is written in such a manner that somebody else who's comparably skilled coder could come in and pick up where they left off and not having to understand the context or the naming conventions or whatever that this person had. And then the other thing is it's built in a manner that is flexible enough so that you don't end up with, what do they call that? Technical debt.
Yes, technical debt. Yes, we strive forever to try not to start each day creating new technical debt, and so that is the goal of our team, and then trying to make sure that we learn from each other and learn from what we're doing, and strive to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Now, this may out me as a complete dork, but I'm going to do it anyway. But this all reminds me of how I name files, or when me and my colleagues are very often working with multiple clients, but we use a similar structure, and I think the same way in terms of if I'm going to write an issue or to do, like it has to be written so clearly that I could dive bomb in with like zero time to reorient myself and remember what the heck I was talking about. And probably like your CTO, if I come in and they see somebody, myself or somebody has written like a issue or to do, and I'm like, you didn't write down who it was. I don't understand what this even means. What is this? Does anyone remember what this is? I felt like that's so frustrating. And maybe it was fewer words, but it created all this complexity around time spent trying to remember or understand or do something with it. So it's like it's the simplicity has a lot to do with the human interface with the information, it seems like.
Exactly. And I think, CEOs and doctors and other, experienced specialists, we all tend to use things like shorthand. And that shorthand, while we may understand it in that moment, and allows us to do things more quickly and more effectively, right? When someone else needs to come back to it later, or even when we have to come back to it later, more often it's when we have to come back to it later, we have no idea what we were talking about. And it's so then to your point of your to-dos and your folders, it's you come back to them, and then you have to spend more than you would have than you saved in the upfront time to be able to go back and understand what you were doing.
I'm inspired now. I've got I feel like I know what so instead of core values, I use operating principles, but I think I know the next one that I'm going to talk about next time it's my turn in the Slack channel. Like to have those examples. Yeah. Sometimes seems like saving a little time up front costs you downstream. So building a discipline around being particular about trying to make things simple more broadly rather than expedient in the moment.
Exactly, which I think is precisely what you were getting to with your heuristic, and making sure that everyone strives to find the simple in the way that they're communicating, but realizing that maybe we need to just dial back the pace that we're going so that we can actually communicate in that simpler way, rather than simply being expedient in describing it with the overly complicated way.
So true. Well, I'm looking at the time. This is probably aiming towards wrapping up soon. Is there anything else that, I don't know, struck you or thoughts that you wanted to share before we close?
No, I think I love the idea behind the book, and the rest of the heuristics. So many of them really stuck out and stuck in having meaning for the way that we operate as leaders. And so congratulations on the book, and best of luck in the rest of these.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate your time.
All my pleasure.